They're claiming that police are corrupt. They're claiming all police officers are racist, that they target black men because of their skin color, yet they actually have the audacity to say, you, the American people, should not be allowed to bear arms. You are not qualified to own firearms or AR-15s, but the police, let's leave this to professionals. They can. We trust them.
Yeah, the evil, racist, terrible police should be the only ones with guns, and President Trump, who we hate and is a Nazi, should be handed those guns as well. I mean, the logic here does not hold, but I'm not sure that logic was ever the strong suit in Hollywood.
No, I think it wasn't. I got a tweet this morning from Sarah Silverman. She was pretending that we agreed on gun control, which I don't think there is a single point that we agree on gun control. She tweeted to me. I want to show this on the screen. She said, wait, I don't get it. You think I care if you legally have a gun or think cops shouldn't have guns? I can't imagine we don't totally agree. Terrorists, people with mental disabilities, domestic abusers, they shouldn't get gun. No kid needs an AR-15. We agree. No? That was her tweet to me, and this is what I find interesting, Ben. The last week or so, Democrats, especially liberal celebrities, seem to have shifted their narrative. They are now pretending that their policies won't deprive people of their Second Amendment right to bear arms. But if you look at the very march, this protest, this rally that Jimmy Kimmel was pushing from the stage of the Oscars, the things that they are advocating for would deprive me a right to bear arms.
No question. There was a poll yesterday or a couple of days ago, I believe it was from Gallup, showing that 80% of Democrats said that they were in favor of a full semi-automatic weapon ban, and about half of Democrats wanted a full-on weapons ban for all sorts of weapons, including revolvers. So for all the people claiming that Second Amendment rights are not in danger, that we all agree on this stuff, I wish Sarah Silverman would answer the question as to whether she actually thinks that all so-called assault weapons should be banned, whether all rifles should be banned in general, because that would answer pretty quickly the question as to whether she's looking for full gun confiscation.
Right, because if we're basing this off of the reaction that we heard at the CNN town hall, when all of the people, the 5,000, 7,000 people in that building cheered at the idea of banning all semi-automatic weapons, that's more honesty, I think, from the Democratic Party than we've heard in a long time. When it comes to these laws that the Democrats are referencing, though, I mean, Sarah Silverman's tweet, she said terrorists, domestic abusers, and people with mental disabilities, we already have laws on the book, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, that prohibit people that have been adjudicated as mentally unfit to own a firearm, that are terrorists, or if they've been convicted even of a misdemeanor domestic violence, those people are already prohibited from owning a firearm.
That's exactly right. But Sarah Silverman can't be expected to know the law. She's posturing. I mean, the idea here is that somehow those of us who are in favor of gun rights are trying to ensure that terrorists and domestic abusers can have firearms. The reality is that, as you mentioned, all of these federal laws are on the books. In 38 states, less than 80% of the people who actually shouldn't have firearms are being reported to the federal government. Obviously, what you saw in Parkland was a failure of law enforcement at every level. The FBI was warned twice, did nothing. The local PD was warned 39 times, at least maybe 45 times, according to CNN, and apparently did nothing. There were deputies on the scene. They did nothing. So the question is, why does she think that more legal authority would somehow fix this problem when the legal authority that's currently in place would have deprived this person of firearms, or at the very least would have prevented this person from shooting the number of people that he did?
Right, and that's where I always have a problem when liberals argue that they don't want to take away our firearms rights, because if we're talking about Parkland, and these celebrities clearly are, the failure here was a failure of the law enforcement, the FBI, like you said, and the Broward County Sheriff's Department, not to act on laws that were actually broken. We have laws on the books already that should have prevented Nicholas Cruz from getting his hands on a firearm. Those laws weren't enforced on multiple times across the board. Our government institutions failed us, and I don't understand why else liberals wouldn't be focusing on that if their ultimate goal wasn't to exploit people's emotions in order to severely restrict our right to bear arms.
No question. And that's why they're constantly mentioning places like Australia as some sort of model. Australia obviously had a gun buyback and confiscation program. Even that was not wildly successful. Only 1/3 of the guns were actually turned in. And the gun violence rate, actually dropped at a lower rate than the United States gun violence rate, even as the number of guns in American society increased. So it doesn't make a lot of sense what they're talking about. But again, I don't think this has to do with an actual policy. Folks on the left are not proposing actual policies, and the policies that they have proposed have no relationship to what actually happened in Parkland.
What would you advise to a young woman who's not married, who gets raped, but does not have access to an abortion, as I think that's something that you believe in? No abortions, right?
Yes, I'm pro-life, yeah.
Okay, so then what would you advise that woman to do?
Okay, so first of all, I do appreciate that you've created the saddest possible scenario for a living human. Is she also disabled? Let's really go whole hog, and she has breast cancer as well. So it's, as long as we're creating imaginary victims. But you know, the answer is that doesn't actually change the calculus, meaning that obviously what happened to this person is an awful, awful, horrible thing. And as I said earlier, the person who raped her should be tracked down, captured, killed, or castrated. So that's number one. As far as the morality of abortion does not change based on need, right? So the fact that she's poor and needs an abortion doesn't change whether she was rich or needs an abortion or poor, because the abortion argument really comes down to, do you think this is a life or not? If you don't think it's a life, you can do whatever you want with it. If you think it's a life, you can't do anything with it. As far as what she does with the baby, that's up to her. You know, it's obviously going to be an obvious economic burden. I would think that there are a lot of people out there like me who would give charity in order to try and help out somebody who's obviously in that sort of situation. And there are charities that exist for people like this to try and help out. And if you know of this woman, tell me her name, and I'm happy to give you some money.
So I'm just wondering, because there is the health of the woman that's taken into question, and she doesn't have the money to have proper health care, or as well as the fact that if she's in college, there's a good chance that she won't be able to continue college.
Okay, the idea that what about the health of the mother? So my view on abortion, again, the morality of killing a baby does not change as long as the baby's not actually threatening the life of the mother. In the cases where the baby threatens the life of the mother, like for example, you have a case where a woman has actual breast cancer and she needs chemotherapy and she's pregnant, but the chemotherapy will abort the baby, which actually does happen, right? That is a case where the mother should, I think, be able to get the treatment. That's not the same thing as an abortion. So they're actually treating the mother for what she's got, and the byproduct of that is the baby is terminated, the baby's killed, basically. I do think that it's important to know two things. One, the solution to something horrible happening is not another horrible thing happening in the killing of a baby, which I think is actually horrible. And two, it's really not good to take the marginal case and then use that to argue broad. So what people tend to do is they say, well, what about the girl who's raped? What about her abortion case? So now let me ask you, if the girl weren't raped and she just got pregnant, would you think that she should still have access to an abortion?
I do, because I think it's her body and I think it's her health.
Right, so you're giving me an exceptional case in order to prove a rule that you don't actually want to defend. So if you just come up and ask me, do I think a woman should have an abortion, then we could actually have an argument about, or discussion about in what cases an abortion was appropriate. But you always, this is what people on the pro-choice side, the anti-life side, actually do. What they actually do is they take the marginal case, they take the raped, woman who has a severe disability, and they say, this is all abortions. That's not all abortions. Significantly less than 1% of all abortions are performed on women who have been raped. So if you want to talk about the epidemic of abortion in the country, over 1 million abortions performed a year in the United States, let's talk about the other 99% of cases. When you are willing to agree with me that the other 99% of cases are not cases where abortion should be necessary, then I'm willing to have a discussion with you about compromise. But I don't think that's what you want. I think that you're just using the exceptional case in order to try and guilt me into supporting a broad-based abortion platform. These are two separate issues. These are two separate issues. Sympathy for the woman and sympathy for, how about a little sympathy for the child? Okay, at any point does sympathy for the child come in here? You say I'm not compromising. I'm the only one in this conversation who's expressed the willingness to take money out of my own pocket and put it in somebody else's.
So have you donated to Planned Parenthood then?
What was that?
Have you donated to Planned Parenthood?
No, because they kill babies.
No, they don't.
They kill 300,000 unborn children a year. No, I don't donate to a baby genocidal organization. Well, welcome. This is Facebook Live and Ben Shapiro Show, and joining me is Representative Jim Jordan from Ohio, a terrific congressperson and a solid fighter for the conservative cause. He's joining me now to discuss the newly released text messages between former members of Robert Mueller's investigative team, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. This time, apparently, there's a new controversy rising. So Representative Jordan, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Ben, and we appreciate all the good work you're doing.
Hey, thanks so much. So let's jump right in. There are a couple of things that are breaking news on the Mueller investigation. Number one is this news that apparently the FBI just misplaced months of messages between Peter Strzok, who is apparently one of the lead investigators on the Trump collusion stuff, and his paramour, Lisa Page. What do you make of this?
You're
right. Is this thing fatally flawed?
It's like, the dog ate my homework. Shazam! We can't find 5 months of text messages. And remember, these are not just any people at the FBI. This is Peter Strzok, former deputy head of counterintelligence. Peter Strzok, who ran the Clinton investigation, interviewed Mills, interviewed Abedin, interviewed Secretary Clinton, changed the now famous exoneration letter, changed the word gross negligence, which tracks with the criminal statute, to extreme carelessness. That guy text messaging with Lisa Page, also part of the Clinton investigation, a key player in the Clinton investigation. All these text messages, those are the ones that they're losing. So, it's one thing when the IRS lost, remember the IRS when Lois Lerner, and they misplaced problems with their hard drive. We can't find some of her emails. And then they destroyed all the backup tapes. Well, it's one thing. You expect incompetence at the IRS, but this is the FBI, for goodness sake. So this is serious, and especially the text messages from these folks that we've seen and all they talk about with their hatred and despisement of folks like you and I and people
and then
like Donald
obviously this is the second major story in the Mueller investigation in recent weeks. We've also learned the Mueller investigation has been compromised in a number of other ways, possibly with regard to a particular memo that is not being released at the House. I wanted to ask you some questions about the release of the memo thing, because I personally am slightly confused about it. Apparently there's a memo that is classified. It's now being read apparently by members of the House who wish to read it, that talks about problems with the FISA process and problems in the FISA applications, and that may have complications for the Mueller investigation. So obviously you can't talk too much about this because it's still classified. My assumption, you don't have to answer this because you may not be able to. My assumption is that it casts aspersions on how the FISA application was originally granted, whether it was based on the Russian dossier that was compiled by Fusion GPS at the behest of the Democrats in the Hillary Clinton campaign. But I have a couple of questions about this. One is, what is the process for actually releasing the memo? Because I'm seeing the hashtag trending, release the memo. What actually has to be done in order to release this to the public?
For the House, it's one thing if the president wants to do it. The president could say, he could say declassify certain information, but this is a House-produced memo. So for us to release that memo, the process is the committee would vote. If a majority of the committee says we want to release it, they can vote to release it. Then the White House has 5 days to give it the thumbs up or thumbs down. Or if they say nothing, after that 5 days, it can be made public. So what we're calling on is that process to start. Have the House Intelligence Committee meet, have a vote, a majority votes to release it. 5 days, it goes to the White House. I would expect the president to do one of two things. I would expect him within 5 seconds to say, release it, give it the thumbs up. Or if he doesn't say that, just to let it ride out those 5 days, and then it can be public. But one thing is critical, Ben. When this goes public, you need the supporting footnotes and references to the material so that it doesn't just look like a partisan document, but a document that is highlighting where this information come from that's in this memo that members of Congress got to read. But I'll tell you, every single member that's read it has walked out of there and said, journalists like you need to see it. More importantly, the American people need to see it, because placed at the highest levels of the FBI should not happen in this country.
What exactly is the holdup? I mean, the Republicans obviously control the Intelligence Committee, so why don't they just vote for it? I mean, are there specific members who aren't pushing for it?
I think no, most are, and I think Chairman Nunes wants to do it. I mean, this was a process of kind of building. First, they were doing their investigation. They produced the memo. We called on a couple of weeks ago, Congressman Meadows and I, to let members of Congress see the memo. That has happened. We've seen it. Every single member who's seen it says make it public. So I think that's where it's going to go. I think they're struggling with how to reference and footnote and cite the classified material and make sure that's done in a way that's consistent with classification standards, consistent with not doing any harm to our intelligence community. But this is so important. You got to get it public. And I wish it would have happened yesterday, but now I'm for as soon as it possibly can.
Well, this brings me to the second question that I have about this, and I mentioned it on my show a couple of days ago. Yeah, obviously, the Trump administration has the capacity to declassify whatever they want, and if what we're really talking about here is the FISA application that presumably includes a Fusion GPS reference, then why doesn't the administration just declassify whatever? I mean, why don't they go through and figure out what has to maintain classification? I mean, it should be up to. I mean, if Trump wants to exonerate himself, this seems like a pretty easy way to do it.
Yeah. And you're right, he could, but I think part of it is, you know how the left is. If the president pushes for something, declassifies something, the left's going to continue to say, oh, there he goes, obstruction, interfering with Mueller, and all that baloney that we've heard now for several months. So my guess is he and his lawyers are a little reluctant to go that route. They would prefer, I think, well, I don't know if they would, but this is probably a route where the president doesn't have to actively do it. He can do it in a secondary way once we've released the memo with, again, the reference incited material.
Okay, so Representative Jordan, I would be remiss today if I didn't ask you a little bit about the government shutdown. Obviously, the Democrats spend 3 days being idiots and shut down the government to no end. They surrender, gaining nothing in the process except demonstrating that they have no leverage. So now, leading up to February 8th, when we're going to have another one of these continuing resolutions that has to come up, the Democrats they've lost whatever leverage they can try here. But we're also leading up to a March 6th deadline on DACA when the applications close, or when DACA itself closes. So what exactly do you expect from the House and the Senate? Because one of my concerns, obviously, is that there is some fractiousness within the Republican caucus. There's some doves like Lindsey Graham in the Senate. They're obviously conservatives in the House like you. What do you expect to come out of this? Because is this going to result in a softer immigration policy, or is this going to result in something that's actually defensible on conservative grounds?
No, great question. You've cut right to the chase, as you typically do. So, we've got to pass a strong bill out of the House. I would prefer what's been called the Goodlatte legislation. Goodlatte, Raul Labrador, and Chairman McCall have put together legislation which has the focus in the right place. And again, I always start from the premise: the American people just assume, and it's a good assumption, that Congress is going to do the wrong thing on immigration. But we had an election in 2016 where it was clear: border security wall, in-chain migration, stop this crazy sanctuary city policy, deal with the visa lottery issue, all the good stuff that we have to do. That has to be the focus. And then the final point is, and then we'll address the DACA issue as well. What Durbin Graham and others want to do in the Senate, I've had a cold here, Mr.
No worries.
Shapiro. So they want to flip it around. They want to go DACA first, a little window dressing around border security, and we promise, we'll finally get to what the American people wanted us to do in the 2016 election and why they put us in power. That is not going to fly. So let's pass the strong bill in the House. That gives us a better position as we deal with the Senate. And the key to this is, of course, President Trump. I'm convinced he's strong on this issue. He was elected on this issue, and he's going to do it the way we want. But that's how it's going to hopefully play out, where that strong bill will be the final product, the one we can pass in the House.
And President Trump obviously is the key component here, because during the immigration meeting that was had at the White House, it seemed like he misspoke at the very least when he talked about what he would sign with regard to Dianne Feinstein, and then Representative McCarthy stepped in and sort of set him straight, and then he was on the straight and narrow and has been since with regard to immigration. The big question is going to be, if the House passes something and the Senate passes something different, it goes to conference committee, something weak comes out, is Trump actually going to push? Is he actually going to veto something? Is that veto threat real, or is the House going to have to act as the shield here? And will the House act as the shield? Will the House prevent something from landing on the president's desk?
I mean, Ben, remember, Paul Ryan is Speaker because one of the conditions he told the Freedom Caucus in a long meeting where the 40 of us sat down with him a couple years ago is there would be no immigration legislation that came to the floor of the House that unless it had the support of a majority of the House Republican Conference. And a majority of the House Republican Conference views this issue like you and I do. So that's the good thing. So I think the House will be strong, and I believe the president will be strong. Remember, this was the issue that launched his campaign and took him in a 17-person primary to the top. So I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
I think we'll be
well, great.
good.
So we'll see how all of that shakes out. And I know that you have a busy day, Representative Jordan. Thanks so much for taking the time. We'll have you back on and do this again when we have some more updates in all of these areas. But you're a friend, and I appreciate you being on.
I won't have a cold the next time.
No worries. Feel better.